Okay, so we're in the final unit, 15, the reproductive system. You have pages due on May 18th, pages 229 to 231. There will be no quiz on this unit because your lab exam will be on Monday, May 18th. Your lab exam will include the spinal cord, again, everything where we started the semester, or started kind of midway through the semester, I think the first or second class before we were on lockdown. Through the reproductive system. So no quiz on this unit, but you will have a lab exam next Monday, on Monday, May 18th. So the reproductive system, I include just anatomical terms to keep it pretty simple for you guys here. We'll start with the males and then we'll go to the females. The general function of the male reproductive system is to create sperm. And this occurs in what we call the scrotum, which is the sac-like structure that keeps the testes located outside of the body. The testes are the organ that create testosterone, which is the male hormone which is needed for puberty and creating sperm. The testes are located outside of the body because sperm need to be held at a cooler body temperature than normal internal body temperature, which is normally 37 degrees Celsius. Sperm needs to be held at a lower body temperature, so that's why testes are held outside the body. We'll look at the seminiferous tubules inside the testes where the sperm are located. The epididymis is a structure located right on top of the testes. That's where sperm will be stored until they're fully mature. And then the Ductus Deferens is a tubular structure, or vas deferens. It leaves from the testes and carries sperm up and out towards the exit. The ductus or vas deferens is located in the spermatic cord, and the spermatic cord carries also blood vessels to the testes themselves. So the vas deferens will carry the sperm up and around behind the bladder, and behind the bladder there's a structure called the seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle will give nutrients to the sperm to survive and nourish them on their way to eventually, their end goal is to fertilize an egg. So they'll travel through the seminal vesicle, which is a vesicle located on the back side of the bladder. They will then go through what we call the ejaculatory duct. And the ejaculatory duct is a tiny tubular structure that's located within the prostate gland. The prostate gland is another gland that's located right below the bladder. It can become enlarged in the elderly males or in possibly cancerous situations. So a prostate exam is to feel the prostate through the rectum, which can be a little uncomfortable but necessary for detecting prostate cancer early. So the ejaculatory duct leads the sperm through the prostate gland into what we call the urethra, and the urethra is the tubular structure in the males that takes sperm and also urine out of the body, because you can see how the urethra is also connected to the male bladder up there as well. What else here? I think that's enough for this picture. I'm just going through your notes. You'll see bulbal urethral glands. They're smaller paired glands on each side of the urethra. They also provide nutrients to the sperm and give it fluid, which makes up the semen as it exits out of the body. So here's a look at the scrotum and the testes itself and the structures within the spermatic cord, which I talked a little bit about. You'll have the ductus or vas deferens, testicular arteries and nerves, and also a nerve plexus, the caminiform nerve plexus. So you can see the testes located in there with the epididymis, and then the vas deferens leading back behind the bladder. Here are the testes and the seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules are tightly wound coiled tubes within the testes that create sperm. You can see them located here. So those are your seminiferous tubules. That's where sperm are created, and then the sperm, once they're created, will be stored in the epididymis, where they're stored until they're fully mature, and then they'll exit out via the vas or ductus deferens. Here's another look at the ducts in the male reproductive tract, because again, the function of the male reproductive tract is just to deliver sperm, which is formed in your testes, to eventually fertilize an egg. So we kind of explain the male reproductive tract within a series of ducts. So testes, seminiferous tubules, lead out through the ductus deferens, which travels behind the bladder and will travel right next to the seminal vesicles. The ampulla of the vas deferens, which is one of your terms to know, is just the area right before it reaches the seminal vesicles. It enlarges a little bit to account for any fluid that it might receive from the seminal vesicles. Then it travels through the ejaculatory duct, which is located in the prostate gland, right below, inferior to the bladder. And then the ejaculatory duct will lead to the prostatic urethra, which the prostatic urethra is still within the prostate gland as well. And then eventually to the membranous urethra, which will exit out of the body. You'll see the bulbourethral glands on either side of that membranous urethra as well. Within the penis itself, we have a glans, which is the outer covering. The prepuce isn't really labeled in this picture. The external urethral orifice is the opening which will take the urine and semen out of the body. And then it's made up of kind of three areas called the corpus sponginosum and the corpus cavernosum. The corpus sponginosum and the corpus cavernosum, which are on both sides. The corpus sponginosum is just on one side. These are filled with erectile tissue to help in reproduction. Okay, so we have the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland. Just another look at where the ampulla from the vas deferens comes in, meets up with the seminal vesicle, travels through the prostatic and membranous urethra through the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral glands are these two small yellow structures right below the prostate gland. And again, these glands provide extra fluid and nutrients to the sperm to create semen to try to protect them and allow them to get through the whole duct system. Then here's a look at the sagittal section of the female pelvic region. We call the external genitalia the vulva, which consists of the mons pubis, the labia majora, minora, the clitoris, and the vaginal orifice. The labia majora and minora are these flaps of tissue which help to protect the opening to the vaginal orifice, and that's just to protect any harmful things or bacteria from getting into the vagina. During pregnancy, labor, delivery, you want to kind of protect that area as much as possible because it's a major opening to the body that could lead to infection. You can see the clitoris is located there. The external urethral orifice leads up to the bladder, and you notice that in the female there's three separate openings in the reproductive tract between the bladder, the vagina, and the anus, whereas the males just had the same opening for the bladder, for the urine and semen to exit. You'll notice internally we have the vagina, which is also known as the birth canal. It ends up at the cervix, and the cervix, surrounding the cervix, we have an anterior and a posterior fornix, which I'll show you pictures of. Those are spaces in the front and behind the cervix itself within the vagina. Then the cervix itself is kind of the base of the uterus. It's an opening that will what we call dilate during birth or delivery. The external os of the cervix is just the opening to the cervix itself. And then within the uterus, we have a body, a fundus, and then layers of walls that we'll talk about. Then the uterus or uterine or fallopian tubes lead from the uterus to the ovary, which is the female reproductive organ that will produce eggs. Fimbriae are extensions of the uterine tube that will help to guide the released egg during ovulation into the uterine tube itself. And the infundibulum is a region of the uterine tube. And we'll go on to the next picture. So this picture shows how the uterus is attached to the wall in the female. So you can see here the vagina comes up to the cervix. Surrounding the cervix, again, we have an anterior and posterior fornix, which I show on the next slide. Here's the uterus itself and how it's kind of attached to the wall of the peritoneal cavity or the lower abdominal pelvic cavity via a series of ligaments, the ovarian ligament and the broad ligament. So the broad ligament is a large ligament just to help attach the uterus, keep it in place. And then you should see the ovarian ligament as well that attaches the ovary itself. Then you can see the uterine tube and how it extends into the infundibulum area. And the infundibulum will eventually extend into fimbriae, which are little finger-like structures which enclose around the ovary to help guide the released egg during ovulation into the uterine tube itself. Here's a look at the anterior and posterior fornix, the areas surrounding the base of the uterus in the vagina that surround the cervix itself. And then we'll end with this. This again just shows the uterine tubes and the uterus itself. You can see here the infundibulum is the part that has the finger-like extensions called fimbriae, and then we have the uterine tube leading into the uterus. The uterus has two layers to the walls, the endometrium and myometrium. The endometrium is the innermost wall of the uterus, and the myometrium is the thicker muscular wall of the uterus. Remember, the uterus is a smooth muscle, so it can contract on its own, and that's what helps expels a baby. It's an involuntary contraction. So that's the end for this slide. Thanks, guys.